Let's move on and talk about Dave Artell, the Crewe Alexandra manager. He, of course, was a no-nonsense player on the pitch. He basically stuck his head in anywhere he could to clear the danger. And I think one or two people were surprised by, when you read up on him, just how intelligent he is. But basically, you've got Dave Artell, the player, and you've got Dave Artell, the manager, and they couldn't be further away from one another, could they?
Absolutely, yeah. It's the big surprise for everyone when you first encounter him. You remember this big centre half that, he's that's what defines him as a manager is his academic side to him. The fact that he's gone away and studied, he's done degrees in different things and studied different concepts outside of football, but applies sort of a worldly knowledge to the game and sees things from a kind of novel perspective compared to most managers. But there's a consistency to his ideas. There's a consistency to his logic and the way he sets a team up. And I think it's all about underlying principles. It's all about some very intelligent underlying principles as well.
Yeah, he prefers his sides to play an eye-catching possession-based style of football. But what I found interesting, and we've talked about managers who have these ideas and won't deviate from them, for whatever reason. But there's been times in the last couple of seasons, and I think it's something that's come later to him, actually, because we didn't tend to see it during the early days. But he's happy to rip up the script. He's happy to try something different if he thinks it will get a result. One example was, I think it was Northampton they were playing. He came out before the match and said, well, look at the state of that pitch. And then his team went long, which is a very unusual thing for Crewe down the years. So does this point to him being quite logical then as well? If he's able to sort of foresee what might happen and therefore quickly make a U-turn or mix things up?
I think as last season developed, it became a real learning experience for Artell. I think he's big on the learning and development side of himself, but also of his players. And I think once it became apparent last season that they were getting bullied in certain games or the conditions weren't suiting them in certain games, I think the reality dawned that maybe we have to mix this up a little bit. I remember one occasion that made me laugh was that, they played Portsmouth at home and drew 0-0. And he completely changed the way he played for that game because I believe a couple of months earlier, he'd done a presentation for the LMA and coaching course that the Cowleys were on. So he'd underlined his entire philosophy to the Cowleys of the way he likes to play and then played completely different a couple of months later against Portsmouth, which they didn't take too kindly to because they thought they had one up. But yeah, he as last season closed out towards the end, he was actually quite vocal about he basically said, yeah, we're going to do things different ways now because we need to evolve next season. We need to learn lessons from this season. There's no point finishing mid-table or lower mid-table playing a certain way. We know how we play. We know what we're good at. We know what we want to do and impose on the opposition. But we need to find out some new things, going forward. And I talk about the learning and development side. I thought it was really interesting the way as well that he approached lockdown before we knew the season had been curtailed with COVID. He basically was 9 games of the season left. He had a squad of 27 players. He divided them up into threes, said, right, we've got 9 games left. Each group of 3, go away. You're preparing us for 1 game each. I'm not doing anything. It's on you. You come and bring back the game plan for us. That's what he's all about. Players that can think for themselves. And because he reinforces the same underlying principles over and over, it's kind of easy. There's a consistency to his logic, though. So we might change the game plan from 1 week to the next, but the underlying principles of what we want to try and do, 9 times out of, for the vast majority of the time, notwithstanding the Northampton game he used, for example, going long, that's not necessarily one of his principles, but there's a consistency there to what he does. So I guess that kind of makes it easier for the players to then be able to think for themselves in new ways, but stick to the principles at the same time.
He's talking about being at Crewe and how he loved being a player there, and he was inspired by working with Dario Gradi and Steve Davis. And he said that working under those 2 managers, they encouraged you to think about the game, but also trust your own ability. And that seems to be something he's putting onto his own players now.
Yeah, that is what he's all about precisely. And yet at the same time, it's really interesting because, we talk about how intelligent he is and, what these principles are and the sound logic that they're founded on. Yeah, he has two core principles that sound like the most basic old school things you'll ever hear. And it's run around, don't whack it. But behind those phrases, he'll turn around all the time and say, I just got into the players at half time. I told them not to run around and don't whack it. There are two main principles. But there's so much nuance behind them principles. He's fleshed out what don't whack it means, why we don't whack it, why we play out from the back. There'll be so much sophistication to that message of don't whack it. The same goes for run around. It's about tempo. It's about energy on the pitch. It's about, we've tracked our performances when we cover these distances, and we've tracked our performances when we don't hit those levels. And look at the difference in the results. Look at the difference in the performance data. So run around and don't whack it. It's really that simple. And this is his form of internal logic. This is the way with the teams like the David Artell teams. It took Crewe a while to get to the level that they're at. They were a very ordinary League Two team for quite a long time, then suddenly blossomed into this promotion contender. Now look just perfectly comfortable at League One. And this is like compound effects of all this really good information that it takes a while to sink in with certain players because it's just the same principles being repeated over and over and over. But then all of a sudden, there's real meaning to don't whack it and run around that you just on the uptake straight away. The pennies dropped. You understand what's being asked of you. You understand what all the connections are basically to all these principles. And that's where we're at now with David Artell. He's been in the job so long, and there's a core of players there, young players that have been through the system, through the club, all get it now. They all get each other and they get what's being asked of them. So you've got those compound effects now. I imagine Crewe being a team that never has to go too deep from week to week, from game to game into planning for the next game because there's so much just kind of innate in the way that they go about the business.
Yeah, don't whack it and run around do feel like things you'd hear at the park and being shouted out for an under-9s game. But yeah, lots of information behind that. And it feels like from a club perspective as well, it feels like he is the perfect candidate. And I know he's proved that, but at first there are a few doubts, but he talks regularly about laying foundations, about developing players for the long-term future, about if you can have more knowledge, you make better decisions. And that's something you sort of learn as you get older. So in terms of what Crewe do, they don't have a huge amount of money to throw about. They bring a lot of youngsters through and they sell a lot of them on as well for decent fees. Dave Artell seems like a perfect match.
Yeah, he's honoured the club's history for youth development, and he I like the way he likens what he inherited to the Germany squad that won the World Cup in 2014. That you've got all these players, you've got the bloodlines of a team that's been together since the age of 9. There's 5 or 6 players there that have all played, all pretty much the same age, have all played through all the various levels together. And you can't throw that out. That there's so much to be gained from if you're a manager that can work with those connections between those players and educate them all in the same way at the same time, so they all understand what you're asking, as well as understanding each other and having those, having that connection on the pitch. I think sometimes you become almost telepathic, don't you, when you've played with somebody so many times. So you've got that, and you've got his principles. And we've got to a stage now where that core of players understands that core of principles. And yeah, like I say, he likens it to the Germany team that won the World Cup in 2014 and the way they'd all come together. So he's honoured that side of it. But at the same time as well, I thought his recruitment last summer was superb in terms of the centre-backs. You're going up with this young team. You're dominating possession at League Two level. You're going to get less of the ball at League One level. You're looking at centre-back and thinking, didn't really have to defend any set pieces at League Two level because teams weren't getting corners and free kicks close enough to Crewe's box. So and then all of a sudden they sign these 2 big centre backs and the real experience, players not to be messed with at that level. And now you've suddenly solved the problem that might have been. I thought it was clever recruitment. So he's kind of getting the balance right of of youth and experience as well. So it's not just about honouring the youth development side and educating younger players and just bringing younger players through. There's a part of it that's about results here and today, here and now. What gaps do we need to plug for the level that we're at? And bearing in mind, this is a manager that's not managed at League One level, yet he seemed to anticipate and just see the bigger picture of what would be needed for Crewe last season in order for them to be comfortable.
And he's talked actually about, he's got a small contingent of older players. I know Chris Porter's one of them. And he talks about how he's referred to them as his dad's army and the players that he wants to take responsibility. But I guess they also the players that he will, maybe take to one side and say, this is the message that I want to get across on the pitch today, because they're obviously, we talked about managers who have their trusted lieutenants. Paul Cook seems to have 11 of them, but these must be the players that he tends to go to when he needs to relay something important.
I think it's possibly the fact that you can put too much weight on young players' shoulders. I think he wants the younger players to focus on the football. I think he wants them to focus on their intelligence, the game intelligence. But sometimes when it potentially comes to the emotional side of things, or you're in a game and points in a game where heads can drop, the psychology and things like that, then I think he might put that responsibility more on the senior pros to manage the younger players as people, and to make them feel like we've got your backs, or if a game gets a bit feisty, anything like that. There's all these other dynamics to a game where you're not just thinking about the intelligence, the tactical intelligence and the technical intelligence of what you're trying to do on the pitch. I think there's other dynamics that's where the dad's army comes into it, and that's where he puts the responsibility on them to manage those situations and kind of just let the younger players develop at their own rate. And I think this will come later for the younger players. I think more and more as last season went on, he did talk more about game management, and I think he did refer to some of the younger players more, that they need to start growing up now. So I think that might be the next stage of Crewe's development this season, is about some of those younger players taking on more of that responsibility of, closing out games and last 15, 20 minutes of games, the goals conceded, still trying to play your football, still trying to be as aggressive with your press, when sometimes it's time to slow the game down and things like that. I think he'll be trying to add more and more of those layers now.
And talking of dads, we're a week late for Father's Day, unfortunately, releasing this podcast, but he's talked about paternal influences as well, and talks about how lucky he was to have a dad who sort of showed him what was right and wrong. And he talks about believing in guiding those players who maybe didn't have the same paternal guidance that he was lucky enough to have, who maybe didn't have strong role models growing up. And he talks about the importance of maybe not just himself playing that role, but his coaching staff playing that role in helping shape those players. And there's a little bit of Dean Smith about this, isn't there? In terms of, he's talking not just on the field, he's talking about off it as well.
Yeah, I think it's more of an aspiration than something he's all over day to day. But yeah, I do think that, there's an understanding there of, it's past experiences. I think it just comes from his own past experiences. I think that informs a lot of his decisions. I think he likes to be an out-of-the-box thinker, think outside the box on certain things. But at the same time, it's underpinned by his past experiences. It's informed by his past experiences. So this is kind of possibly an example of him thinking outside the box. Not many people think about, the role models in players' individual lives. He doesn't necessarily go, prying into or asking personal questions. I can't imagine him being the sort of person that would sit down and have a heart-to-heart with a player on that level too often. I think he'd want to know a player's circumstances and background. Now, how can we help that player without necessarily dealing in the emotions ourselves? But taking care of players' needs is more of an aspiration, and creating a system that enables them to do that. But the identification of it is thinking out of the box in itself, and it's informed by now getting to an age and understanding how lucky he was himself.
And he talks about empathizing and sympathizing with the players as well. He says that he never wants to be one of those managers who just says, right, you're not needed here, goodbye. He never wants to be one of these managers who just freezes players out for no obvious reason. He says just sitting down, having a chat about it, discussing what's gone right, what's gone wrong, clarity of mind. He talks about as well. He wants to be able to communicate with the players, have respect for them, and engage in the right manner.
Yeah, and I think the clarity of mind is probably the big thing there, is that I think what he strives for, and again, this is, I don't see him as an emotional person, so I don't see these as being heart-to-hearts in the sense that some people might understand heart-to-hearts. I think he sees, we talk about managers like Mark Robins, for example, not being emotional, but being helpful. And that's how he gets the connection piece across. That's how he shows that he cares, is that he helps as much as he can. This is a different kind of helping, but it's about wanting to everybody to be honest, get to a place of where we all understand each other and we're honest. And then, once that basically let's, the emotions will take care of themselves if we could just be honest with each other. So I want to be as clear and as honest with you as I can, and try not to hurt your feelings, because I know it's something I'm not particularly, I'm not going to turn around and be just say the right thing at the right time and just to make you feel better instantly. So the way we have to try and connect is just try and get as honest as we can with each other. And then hopefully we'll work through this on a logical level that then you go away feeling better that, okay, well, at least we've got some clarity between us now and where we're both coming from. Yeah,
we talked about intelligence. We touched on it at the start. We've not really expanded on it, but he, and I don't think it's just the glasses, but he certainly looks like a thinker. He listens to podcasts. I know that much. I don't think it's this one, but he certainly, I know on the way to training, he listens to podcasts. He reads a lot of books as well. And of course, we talked about his degree as well. We often see managers who've got degrees in subjects that, might be closely related to sport. This is a man who has a degree in forensic biology. And he claims as well that actually it was when he was playing, he used to come home, watch Diagnosis Murder, She Wrote, and Cracker, amongst other things. And that was how he got into it. Again, this is a man who clearly wants to develop and better himself.
Yeah, I think he's a proud nerd. I just think he is. He's that intelligent side of him. I think he just wants to learn information. Like, we're kind of going back to Carlos Corberán in this aspect, in that constant thirst for information and new knowledge, and because he's able to retain so much. I think. For some people, it's difficult. You learn new subjects and you just don't get it. You just, and I think he's the type of personality that's quick on the uptake of information, can store it, can make sense of it straight away. So that kind of builds up a thirst for more and wanting to understand more different things and then try to map it all out. So I think he's the sort of manager that will always be looking to make connections with football as well. I don't think he does this stuff outside of football just to please himself. I think he'll be taking things he's learned or picked up on from other fields and thinking, right, how can this be applied in the football world? And because I might be gaining an edge on someone by doing things differently. But if other teams aren't doing this way, it's never even occurred to them to apply this specialist field, the core principles behind it. It's all about principles with him. It's all about, you don't literally take something, from one of these fields. And then, it's not in a very literal sense. It's what's the underlying principle? Why do they do that? Okay, so in football, why would they do something similar? And then think of a parallel rather than an absolute like for like.
What's he like in terms of looking ahead then? Because he has said in the past, if you stare too far into the future, you might scare yourself. He plans obviously meticulously on a day-to-day level, but how far ahead is he getting in terms of his ambitions and in terms of Crewe's ambitions?
I don't think he's a major strategist in the sense of I don't think he's a planner in terms of a long-term planner. I think he is, again, we're back to principles. He follows principles, so he doesn't necessarily need to plan because the principles take care of most of the things that come up. So he's comfortable with spontaneity and he doesn't have to have all his ducks in a row in advance. He's aware that football can be chaotic, unforeseen things can just come up out of nowhere and then your best laid plans, have gone to pot. So he conditions himself to be comfortable with that spontaneity. So I guess that's what he's saying with the, scaring yourself if you look too far into the future. At the same time, there is a part of him that wants to do things differently. He wants to look for the novelty and do things in ways that people possibly haven't done them before. Not necessarily, not because he's trying to be different. He's not trying to stand out from the crowd. He's just trying to stimulate himself, I think. And I'm trying to take things, from other specialist fields and see and just kind of logically map it out and think it through of how that might look in the football world.
So then, next season, Crewe hoping to build on a mid-table finish. I must say they were very impressive in their debut season in League One. played some really good stuff. But as you say, maybe just got found out by more experienced opposition on occasions, and the hectic fixture list as well, just, may have completely thrown them at times. What do you see happening in the 2021-2022 campaign?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so many big name managers coming down, so many big clubs now. It's going to be such a competitive league next season. It's, I think it's definitely a league where if you stand still, you go backwards. I don't think Crewe will stand still. So maybe what they achieved last season is possibly what they might achieve again, but with a degree more, or a sense of evolution in the process, in that they're a club that feels like they're doing things better, even if the bottom line in the league table isn't all that different. But then, if a few of those big clubs get off to a bad start, there'll be managers out of jobs because of the expectations that they bring. So it's certainly not hiding to nothing or a thankless task for the likes of Crewe and Accrington and these teams that are really cleverly run, that are very low budget but can punch above their weight in the league. I'm inclined to think probably another mid-table finish, but they've shown last season. They beat the likes of Peterborough. They gave a lot of the top teams a real good game and playing football. Not just getting lucky on a day, or they played good teams off the park at times. So yeah, more of the same really.
And as for Artell himself, we mentioned perfect fit at Crewe. It's a really nice fit, isn't it? It's a really good relationship. But can you see him managing A, higher up, and B, somewhere else? What do you reckon?
I think he can, but I don't think he will. For most of what you've said, I just think he's a good fit at Crewe, but he doesn't really get talked about. But he doesn't court the publicity either. There's not an awful lot of features out there to find about him in newspapers and stuff like that. Might have something to do with FA Cup runs, and you get big third round weekends and potential giant killings and stuff like that. But he doesn't strike me as a manager that's ever picked up the phone saying, does anyone fancy doing a feature on me? It's like, I've got an agent representing him. You can't really find an awful lot about him and yet he's very accommodating to the local media, which suggests that, he's just not on a national radar yet that much. So maybe that might change this season. That might be something that develops out of the way that Crewe go about the business. I think he can potentially manage higher, but I also think he needs time. I don't think it happens overnight. It hasn't happened overnight for Crewe. I don't think it would happen overnight elsewhere. I think you need a fair degree of patience for his principles and his way of intelligence to just sink in the penny to drop with players.